funding is through the Ohio Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services. So we'd like to credit their leadership and partnership, and Shemaine Armour as our lead partner with OMAS. We also like to credit the Center for Children's Justice Department and Andrea Jar for being what we consider the national lead for the program. She now works for a company called JBS International, but again, we still credit West Virginia for developing the program. And Andrea still acts as what we consider the the national lead for the program. We also like to credit the former First Responder Subcommittee, the Ohio School Resource Officer Association, and Ohio School Safety Center, along with the Ohio State Highway Patrol, for being what we consider statewide champions of the program. And hopefully all of those kind of language bits will be clear as we move forward. So looking at the next slide, just summarizes what our program really is. So I always say that we have a variety of presentation timeframes and links, and it's always a fun time to do this in a condensed format because it really is just an overview. We'll try to make it a comprehensive overview since we have about 25 minutes or so today and time for questions. But keep that in mind as I kind of hit through these kind of highlights on what our program is about. So we are a trauma-informed, collaborative, and cross-systems response to ACEs, which is all, I'm sure your group is all too familiar with that language, right? Sometimes I have to explain what that is, but not today. So our goal is to promote resilience through positive relationships with school staff and first responders. And we do that again through the layers of this program. So all coordinators are required to work in collaboration with myself and with our state effort. So there aren't programs in Ohio using Handle with Care and the model without that connection. And we've done that to maintain fidelity of the program as we've grown in the state. Again, so there's that ongoing collaboration between Ohio's formal effort and each community or county through their coordinator, and they lead locally. So we've done that so that the program can really reflect and serve for or serve the community best, recognizing that our state is very diverse. And in some counties, we have one school district, and in some counties, we have 30. And that's going to change the way that a school-based program looks just at the very kind of introductory level. So locally, those coordinators kind of walk through that process and again, the way that's best fit for their community and those districts and partners within. That all starts officially with what we call a partners meeting. That's where county leadership, and again, most of our language is county, community, district are kind of words you can substitute there as well. But where leadership gather to learn about the program, learn about the components and what they need to do to participate, with the goal of ideally saying, yes, we want to do this in our community. Let's go ahead and plan these next steps. And this is how we'll support these next steps. And again, it's really meant to be like a workshop of sorts in getting the community started in Handle with Care. We move forward with training of trainers so that coordinators aren't responsible for all of the trainings that are required to Handle with Care, because we do require that all first responders who are planning to send a notice or any school staff needing to receive a notice are trained to Handle with Care. So it is a lot of training, especially for our larger districts. But if we recruit and train trainers from those different agencies and schools, we can really move things along and build that capacity to meet that training need pretty quickly. And it's been pretty effective at this point in Ohio. So after both sides, and I say both sides very boiled down, senders or receivers of this Handle with Care notice, and we're going to talk about what that really looks like as we move forward. But either senders and receivers need trained. Once that training is done, the program launches. That's where the notice itself is actually sent and then received by first responders. And then what we consider first responder visits to schools, that's a very kind of unique to Ohio requirement where first responders are invited to step into the school buildings. And again, in an effort to build, sustain, repair those relationships, because we know that resilience happens through those relationships and is built in those ways. So that's the goal. Coordinators worry about maintenance and reporting. I will say it is very kind of short and sweet. If this is your first time learning about the program, it is the number of notices sent or received in a community, plus some anecdotal data that we collect through Google surveys. And then there's an ongoing collaboration piece, again, with communication, but coordinator based. So for the community, long-term maintenance is pretty simple. And we'll look at the next slide, please. Again, quick overview, but we can't really talk about Handle with Care without talking about what happens in the school response on the school side of things, because we want to be transparent and really explain to the best of our ability in a short time what that looks like when a student is handled with care. So what I want to make very clear is that Handle with Care never includes specific details in an event. It is always only Handle with Care and the student's name. So we're not saying handle with care, Robyn Venoy, domestic violence. We're not saying Handle with Care, Robyn Venoy, car accident. We're not saying any specific details. That's part of how our program is allowed to exist and part of how it was developed and piloted a decade or more ago. And again, that is one thing that is consistent in Ohio and across the country, in that it is only ever the student's name and Handle with Care. In Ohio, we require that at least 3 staff receive that notice at every level, and that's our way of trying to be protective and proactive against emergencies in the school building and other crises that administration might need to tend to first thing in the morning. And then not to mention things like vacation days that we hope our school administration also get to enjoy periodically and step away from that primary role. And so only having that notice goes to one person, again, kind of poses the risk that that notice is overlooked or is just not a priority first thing in the morning. So we require at least 3 people at every level, which again is mostly every school building. To receive that notice, those school teams determine who is the primary person responsible for acting on that notice, and then again build in their own system for managing other crises or again time off and on what that might look like. After that notice is received, that team leader passes that information or lack of information, since it's only Handle with Care, to what we consider need to know staff. And while that varies a little bit from building to building, our guidance to schools is that if a staff person interacts with a student in the course of the day, go ahead and share the Handle with Care notice as a better safe than sorry approach. We want that bus driver to be informed if the student rides a bus. That's the first and last staff person, potentially the first and last safe person that a student sees each day. Their ability to handle with care can be really impactful. If that student is walking through the lunch line, or if that student has art class that day, we want staff that are going to be interacting with the student to be aware. What we don't want is an all staff notice, because while we're not sharing specific information, we're still trying to be respectful of a student's event and be mindful of privacy and just some of those concerns. And so in a, let's say, K-5 building, what we don't want is for 5th grade notice to go to all kindergarten, all 1st grade, all 2nd grade teachers. The likelihood that there's interaction there, again, is pretty near 0. And so staff, school administration will recognize, while there is some flexibility with that need to know group, it is not all staff, it is need to know staff. School staff are trained to respond to that notice in a few different ways. The big ones that we like to cover during these overview presentations are that they are trained to not ask any questions and to not use leading statements in their responses. So what Handle with Care is not is an invitation to go and question the student on what happened. So they're not going to go, oh, hey, Robyn, something bad happened last night. Do you want to tell me about that? That's not part of our practice. We're also not going to use leading statements as in bad things happen to everyone. Are you feeling okay today? With those kind of all of that affect and all of those tones and whatnot, that it is really an invitation. And again, very leading and trying to investigate or get more details. We say it's like receiving a box marked Handle with Care or a package marked Handle with Care. Most of us know what that means. I think probably in 2024, post-COVID and in the Amazon era, we all know what Handle with Care means. We get a box. We don't need to know what's in the box to know what that means. And that's the same thing with students. We don't need to know what's happened to respond with Handle with Care, or with care in this case. So no questions asked, no leading statements. And also because we don't have those details, we don't need to make automatic referrals to mental health. In some cases, the best practice for those students will be a normal school day of just peer-to-peer interaction and being a kid, or just being a friend, being a student without any, again, adult interference, if you will. Beyond what we call the baseline handle with care, which staff are trained and get another handout that walks through what that is. There are very basic relationship building strategies like greeting a student, offering words of praise or affirmation. So again, very baseline. That means a teacher who is handling with care without any additional observable needs may just need to say, "Hi, Robyn, I'm glad to see you today," and go on about their day. We do train that staff practice any ways to handle with care with 3 to 5 students so that this handle with care student is never singled out, especially as you look at older grades. If I'm getting a special greeting or a high five from every staff person that I passed that day, my middle school and high school peers are going to start to wonder if I'm student of the week or student of the day, or if it's my birthday, something along those lines. But if every staff person practices those same baseline strategies with 3 to 5 other staff members, I become much more anonymous in that mix. So again, the baseline ways to handle with care, very easy, very doable, really just meant to kind of open the door to relationship, sustain that relationship, allow the student to be seen. And then if the staff observes a need on behalf of the student, that they can provide alternatives if needed. So it may, again, be that the school day looks pretty normal. It may be that student comes into class and they don't have their homework, and teacher notices that. Again, train not to draw any attention or single the student out. The best way to really do that in a situation like that is probably just asking to see the student after class, or as the class is leaving, kind of a tap on the shoulder. "Hey, can I see you after class for a minute?" Again, we're trying to be as minimal with that public impact or public awareness, but after they have that one-on time or during that one-on-one time, the staff person can then say, "Hey, I noticed you didn't have your homework today. If you want to bring that Monday, that's okay." Right? I didn't ask any questions. It's based on my observation. That could be done without a handle with care notice, right? That could just be a teacher's practice and giving students a little bit of grace and extensions as a recognition that people are people and we all have things that are sometimes out of our control. So again, to the best of their ability, they do so without drawing any additional attention to the student, but really just allowing our goal of trying to boil this down is that if we can make the student's day better instead of worse, let's try, right? Also recognizing that if consequences are necessary, that's understandable. Sometimes they absolutely are, but how those consequences are delivered can also make an impact. So it's ultimately about showing care, which is right there in our title. So we'll look at the next slide. And again, that's a summary of what the schools are trained to do. And it really already fits with all of the other initiatives and programs that teachers and schools are doing. So oftentimes our training at the school level is very much, you're doing all of this, so close to doing all of this. The only thing that this really changes in some cases is just that heads up. We know that teachers care. We know that teachers are trying to make that difference. We know that schools are doing the same. But sometimes we don't know that something's happened until days later. And so this is really just that heads up to allow them to be those caring professionals that they already are. So on to the next group of caring professionals that Handle with Care focuses on. I'm actually going to go back to the slide, sorry, if possible. We want to talk a little bit about first responder visits because it is what we consider the other side of the Handle with Care coin in Ohio. So those notices to schools and that interaction with school staff is one side, first responder visits is the other. So they really exist together. You can't have one without the other. And this is that invitation for first responders to step into the building and engage with students in a place where they're more likely to feel safe. This is meant to be done without any other curriculums or any other agendas. It is honestly just meant to be fun and opportunities for connection between community first responders and students in those communities. This is in addition to the presence of school resource officers. It's always a question that we get. If you remember at the very beginning, we consider the Ohio School Resource Officer Association to be a statewide champion of the program. And we are supporters of school resource officers. I have called them bridges. I have been known to call them unicorns. Either way, they are really, really crucial to success of the program where they exist because they're staff that work both in the school building and in their police department or their sheriff's office. And that is a very, very unique role that's only to school resource officers. So they can communicate and really align with either side and help move the program forward in a way that makes sense to both sides. And again, really awesome bridges for successful programs, but they are still one person, or in districts where there may be a few, they're still one or just a few people. And the goal of this first responder visits part of the program is to allow students to interact with a variety of their community first responders, because although we know that resilience is built through relationships, and we know that one significant relationship can make a lasting impact, we don't know which significant relationship that will be. And so opening as many of those doors as possible is just our way of hoping to foster some of those natural connections, and also just give students the ability to connect with, again, a variety of their community first responders. I will share in my background as a mental health provider. I cannot tell you how many times when we were talking about first responders, police specifically, where students would have some very negative opinions. And when I asked specifically about the school resource officer, they were their best friend. And they thought they were the nicest person in the world, but they were the only, and it was not the rule. And so that's really kind of what we're trying to flip here, is just, again, giving students the ability to connect with those first responders and build those relationships. It is separate from those other initiatives, like I mentioned earlier. So even if they're already doing a DARE program or a driving safely program, and there are names for those that I'm definitely missing, any of those other initiatives, that's great. This is still meant to happen in addition to. This is meant to be your community police officers, your community firefighters really stepping in and having lunch, stepping in and having recess. And if we look at that next picture, you'll see some of the difference. So it's really not meant to be that an officer comes in and does this DARE presentation. It's meant to be as fun as it looks, hopefully, and that they're coming into schools, they're showing their cruisers, they're showing the ambulance, they're just engaging. They're playing basketball. You see all these beautiful pictures from Seneca County and their coordinator, Jill Ghosh. Really just facilitating. I think they're reading or doing some show and tell of sorts in the bottom corner, but and I think the pictures might convey a little blurry, but their Facebook page is full of gems. If you're curious and want to see more pictures, this is what that's meant to look like. So I hope that you can see that while it's in alignment with those other initiatives, it's still very different. So we'll look at the next slide about how we really make this happen. So I've mentioned coordinators and champions and trainers. Hopefully this chart really breaks that down and helps you see some of the differences and some of the similarities in those roles and how we really move this program forward in each of our communities. So I've used community, county, and district. I will say that historically the program was county-wide. That's because of how it was developed initially in West Virginia. And we also did a county-wide requirement when we started our work in Ohio. So a county and every district within that county had to move forward simultaneously in the beginning of our work here in Ohio. We are a little over 4 years into an official effort here in the state. And in those 4 years, we've adapted so that it's not an absolute countywide rollout, even though we do require the first step of a partners meeting to be countywide as a way to share the information with all local leadership. After that, districts, counties, coordinators can lead what we call a rolling launch, where districts with interest launch as soon as they're able. Sometimes that means groups of, 2 districts will launch in the fall, 3 districts will launch in the spring. It varies. But there is a difference there. So that's why we use some of that language interchangeably, but I also want to point out that there is actually some separation. So you may have county coordinator, you may also have a district coordinator depending on the structure and oftentimes the size of the county. So those roles, however, do mimic each other very closely. So they're listed there together. Again, trainers work with their coordinators to train their colleagues. So again, all staff who are either sending or receiving a notice need trained. So our first responder partners, any community senders, that training is 15 minutes. So it's short and sweet. It's meant to be when to send the notice, and then how to engage with students during first responder visits so that they get the big, important kind of details around those visits, including things like we're not targeting students, we're not beelining to students that first responders have had former interaction with. It's meant to be a very generic engagement. All other pieces we don't have time for in an overview, but there are, again, our training requirements. On the school side, those trainers facilitate either a 15-minute support staff training or a 30-minute minimum certified staff requirement, which is generally your teachers and admin. So overall, minimal training, but really hopefully covers the bases. That's our goal, and helping them handle with care. And you see, again, those roles kind of mimicked. You do sometimes have school leadership or first responder leadership that are not trainers, that are just kind of facilitating the program's growth and success in their counties. And then ultimately a champion is what we consider an active participant. And we'll leave the rest for what you've read or any questions follow up. So we'll look at the next slide just to show a little bit about progress. So I mentioned before that we're a formal effort as of 2020. The work in Ohio actually started in the fall of 2018. And by 2019, which is what you see here, we had grown to, I think it's a little over a dozen counties, or at least knowledge in a little over a dozen counties. And we've adapted this STAR system, which is, again, you'll see nationally oftentimes a yellow star indicates interest. In Ohio, we've used a green star to indicate development. That just means that someone in the county has stepped forward as a coordinator. And then it can also mean that they have a coordinator and are just in the training phase of implementation. So they're kind of in that middle ground, and that's all deemed as a green star. And then once those trainings are complete, all of those pieces are in place, they go live or launch their program, become an active program, and get that blue star recognizing their work. And looking ahead at the next slide, you'll see where we are in April of 2024. So this is where we're at. And since you are all from across the state, this is a really important map because we've talked about roles, we've talked about the program. So wherever your interest might be, assuming you have some, if you're curious about what that looks like in your own county, this and what we'll add to the chat box as we move into breakout rooms or into the next portion will give you access to connecting directly with your county. I'll be happy to answer questions today, and I do my best to stay tuned in since it is my job on what's happening in the counties, but I'm never going to claim to be an expert on what's happening in all of our counties. That's your coordinator. So you can connect directly with your county. If your county only has a yellow star of interest, I am your point of contact. We'll talk about what that interest means in your county, what's been done, what conversations have been had, at least to my knowledge, and talk about ways that you could help move the program forward, which does not automatically mean that you have to be a coordinator. There are lots of ways that you can act as a champion and just help us get a foot in the door and really get started. And that's especially valuable in those yellow counties. But even if you're in green or blue, I always say there's room at the table. There is an open door for you, especially in this line of prevention that we're all in. I think there's always room at the table. So regardless of where your county is in the process, I would encourage that you reach out if you have an interest. Just tell your coordinator that you've heard about Handle with Care, that you'd like to learn more about your county program and ways that you can help, and I'm sure they'll have an answer for you. So that is where we're at in Ohio. Obviously, our goal is to cover the entire state with all blue stars, and that's where we're headed, hopefully, in the coming year. So thank you again for listening for the last 25 minutes or so. I'm going to add a few resources in the chat box. We also have a website that includes this map and a directory, but I will pass it back to Tessa again with thanks to everyone, and share those resources in the chat box.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Robyn. Sorry I hadn't used my voice in a minute, so it's coming out a little froggy. Thank you guys so much we've gotten a couple questions in, but also thank you so much, Robyn. This was a really great overview of this work. It's wonderful to hear directly from you. This is the portion of prevention exchange where we would typically go into breakout rooms. We're having some technical difficulties today. So, what we're going to do is we're going to pause our recording for the time that we would normally be in a breakout room, and we're going to discuss as a group. We typically don't record the breakout rooms. So, this is to give you that same level of comfort in asking questions and fumbling through language and expressing yourself, because we all understand what it's like when something is going to be recorded and left on a website. We may edit ourselves a little. What were those aha moments from today's session? What were some things that maybe clicked for you around collaboration, around the goals of the program? So, maybe we came in with an idea of handle with care is something a little different than it is. This idea that, maybe it involves treatment more often than it does. We had an amazing group. There may have not been some aha moments. Jen or Sarah, was there anything that was an aha moment for you?
So I see the partnership, the
Mhm.
powership of partnership and collaboration in the chat. Thanks, Jerome, for offering that up. And I kind of want to echo on that. The Handle with Care is an amazing program and has the opportunity to, impact and really make a difference for, children and the educators who are supporting these kids who might be going through a tough time. And none of that is possible without, intentional communication and truly, that collaboration and making sure folks are on the same page. And so I appreciate that all of the work that we learned about that goes into training and making sure folks know how to handle those situations in a delicate manner has really given me an appreciation for how much work has to happen behind the scenes.
Absolutely. I'm seeing in the chat also the volunteer aspect of this world. While Ohio has an incredible workforce, we absolutely do. We have a really, really strong prevention focused workforce, which is
Yep.
really great.
Yeah, I'll add to that, and that it really has. I was on a real pro Ohio kick during our COP just yesterday, actually, because I don't want to go too far into the weeds, but we really do have so much structure and so much have really just made so much progress in Ohio that is very specific to Ohio and the way that we have rolled out this program. And we're seeing so much success and so much continued growth in a way that I do think just it really says so much about Ohio's workforce. And I'll add a couple numbers to that, and that we have at the end of 2023 had 810 volunteer trainers to train others to handle with care. So again, there are, I think, all but one. We do have one purely volunteer who's retired, but I think all the other 809 are working as part of a primary role, but still volunteering to take on this extra work to train others. And then around 70 coordinators that are doing the same. So it really is amazing that people see the benefit and want to make that difference and are willing to step out and work with us to do so.
Wow, that is amazing. And Chris added collective synergy as Ohio strengthens this practice. Like that is absolutely it's spot on. And I love, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Nope, I was just gonna say in the comment, I'm assuming we saw the same one about not calling students out. Yeah. We try to make that as clear as possible because we want to be as protective as possible of the students and respectful to the point that we don't know specifically what happened. And so just kind of giving them that room, but also being observant and showing care where staff can, I think is really all we need to do. And so I like that you appreciate that aspect.
Absolutely. And that's such a natural piece that when we have students in our building every day, we care about them. We want to say, hey, how you doing? That's on your mind, but recognizing that just our impulse, it may have a ripple effect and we may not recognize the impact on that student's day-to-day life. Absolutely.
So I have a thought, and I'm also receiving some notices. I think we have some work to do to figure out the webinar bugs, since I've gotten some of you aren't able to come off of chat, and we can't see I can't seem to fix that in the I'm sorry, come off of mute, and I can't seem to fix that in the moment. So we'll work on that. But oh, Elizabeth, thanks for your comment. How do you balance, Robyn, how do you balance holding students accountable with Handle with Care?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess that would depend very much on the specific behavior or kind of issue that we're trying to bring accountability to. I will say a big part of our program is staff discretion, because when we train teachers and schools, we recognize that different relationships are already existing, and so some of that will just come from those relationships and discretion at work. So if a teacher, for example, is in a class where, and I'll stick to that example I shared earlier, where student doesn't have the homework. If they're an honor roll student doing really well in the class, typically, and teacher has that knowledge, again, there might be more flexibility in a homework pass versus a homework extension, right? So it's not saying that they're still not accountable to turn that homework in, but is it make or break to do that 2 days later or 3 days later? And again, staff will probably know the answer to that in ways that I don't, but just kind of recognizing that human need and where there is gray room. Now, on the other side of that is there are students who sometimes come to class without homework because they played video games or were doing whatever through the night and just didn't prioritize homework. And our goal, it really is where there is overlap. So you may have knowledge that a student struggles with boundaries and priorities, and then also has a Handle with Care notice, that we can just extend a little extra grace and recognize that accountability, and kind of recognition and just awareness that that video game might be an escape and might be a coping skill. And although we might still need to learn some boundaries, is it make or break to allow that homework, or at least give the opportunity for it to be turned in a couple days later? I tend to lean on the side of, I don't see the harm there. It's probably why I'm in this position. So again, there's a lot of discretion at work among staff. And then if consequences are absolutely necessary, right? If they've spoken out in class or whatnot and have crossed a boundary in the school, then how that consequence is delivered can be really powerful. I will read that, but I want to follow up, and I don't remember his name. I think he was a former superintendent. I will look and I will email Dr. Miracle in case, or you all email me if you want the details and I will find them. But a superintendent shared the story of when he learned about trauma-informed practices and started instituting them in his work, and even in how he delivered the consequences, such as an expulsion, made a difference. And he said he didn't believe it before until he practiced it and really saw the difference. So it's not saying consequences can't happen, but even how we deliver them can make a difference. And this is motivation to find his name and share that more.
Absolutely. And even recognizing you or I are able to ask for extension. Like if I have a headache or I don't feel well or, anything like that, I'm able to say, hey, can I get this deliverable to you tomorrow? And I think what you're saying is not that someone would be excused in perpetuity from, oh, you never have to do homework again, but hey, this one time, like maybe giving you a couple extra days, because we also understand how trauma impacts the brain and how trauma can really make it so we actually don't have memory from certain time. Even if I've sat through your lesson, I may not be absorbing it at the same rate that I normally would. So I think what you're really saying is not only trauma informed, but just recognizing the biology of what folks are going through. And what I'm hearing you say is, hey, just a couple days, not forever. You never have to submit homework again, or we'll give you until the end of the semester. It's just, let's get a couple days for you to catch up, not only catch up with your emotions and your experience, but also allow your body to catch up. We know our bodies, especially around trauma, our bodies have a really big reaction, and it takes a minute for that to come back down.
Yep, absolutely. And we've used homework as an example, but there are other ones that we often talks about. If a student is sleeping in class, it's not saying that they can just permanently nap through algebra every day, but if they're visibly tired and we have that Handle with Care notice, that just gives us the ability to pair those two things and recognize that something happened that may cause that tiredness. And that's a primary human need, that they're not going to be like Dr. Miracle shared, they're not going to be absorbing any of those functions or equations if they're needing sleep. So if they can get to the nurse's office, and again, that's where it gets a little tricky and we practice discretion, but they're already causing some attention to be drawn to themselves by sleeping in class. So teacher's response might be a tap on the shoulder. Can I see you in the hallway? And then once in the hallway, instead of a consequence, they say, I noticed you seem tired today. Would you like to go to the counselor's office or nurse's office to have a 15-minute rest or whatever it might be? That doesn't mean they get that pass every day during algebra. It's just trying to recognize, like you shared, that students have primary needs and that school typically isn't one of those when we really break it down to what we need to live and to exist, and also recognizing that those human needs are allowed for in the adult world, where we have more coping skills and more experience with personal days or sick days or extensions, and we don't always extend that same grace to students who are still learning how to people. So they're still learning. Yeah. Yep. Chris, exactly. And it's really pairing that all together. So it's not an excuse, it's just recognizing that they're small, younger humans and that we're just trying to kind of guide their way in the way that I think is we always say you're trying to make their days better, not worse. And long term, that is much more effective in getting them to stay connected in school and to perform and to meet those milestones and all those other ways if they feel connected and supported. And just recognizing those human needs are always going to come first, whether or not we want that to be the case.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone, so much. And thank you, Robyn. I really appreciate you answering questions. And it was wonderful to learn from you today. Now is the time in our work where I hand this back to Jen to talk about connecting with the center, the evaluation piece that's associated with the survey, and any other items from the center.
Absolutely. And in all of our tech glitches, I realized that I did not even share my screen while I was talking. So sorry, none of y'all could see my face, but I'm here. If you haven't connected with us and receiving our monthly newsletter, we encourage you to go ahead and scan that QR code. We will only email you once a month. And our April newsletter just went out about 3 hours ago and featured all kinds of resources on trauma-informed care, trauma awareness. And we have a new feature on our website, a resource library that also houses much of the content from the newsletter if you did not receive that yet. So there's still hope. Really appreciate everybody working with us and being flexible for the tech issues. This conversation, I'll leave you with one parting thought. This conversation reminds me a little bit of our very first prevention exchange, Tessa. And I don't know if you remember our saying yes to the Oh Yes conversation we had. Oh Yes is if you're not familiar, is a substance use prevention survey that's done in some school districts across Ohio. And the conversation focused partially on building relationships to get buy-in in the school district for whatever topic you're trying to advance or champion. So while Oh Yes was the focus of that particular conversation, I see a lot of the conversation around Handle with Care being very applicable to that. So if you're curious and want to hear perspectives and some thoughts on, building that grassroots effort, since it sounds like, many of us on the session may not be familiar with or necessarily have Handle with Care in our schools, invite you to go back to our website, take a peek. You'll be linked directly out to the YouTube page where you can find the September 2022 prevention exchange, I believe. So thank you, Sarah Sipis, for sharing that in the chat. And thank you to all for sticking around, engaging with Tessa, myself, Robyn, of course, and we will look forward to seeing you back next month. And Marissa, I'm sorry, your hand is up. Did you have something that, let me unmute you. So go ahead.
Hi, no, I don't know what I bumped. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay.
I didn't. Thank you,
It's
though.
okay. It happens to the best of us. We're all just thrown off by the webinar.
Well, and I think you just helped us to troubleshoot for next time. If someone wants to chime in, they have to raise their hand. And then we can
Absolutely.
unmute them. So thanks for helping there.
Absolutely. And with our last minute left, want to remind you guys that we do have the evaluation QR on the screen. So please feel free to fill that out on your time. And just thank you all. And thank you, Robyn. Thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it. It was just an absolute pleasure to work with you.
Thank you, everybody. Take care.
Yeah, thanks again for having me.